Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Political reflections, centrist bloc to lose majority in EU vote as Greens and Eurosceptics gain. The European parliamentary election is the second largest democratic exercise in the world, with citizens across 28 nations voting for their new representatives. While the Brexit Party topped UK polls, pro-Remain parties collectively secured more votes than pro-hard Brexit ones. But essentially, you can spin it any which way you care to. I agree with this from Charlie Robertson. The rejection of the neoliberal orthodoxy since the 1970s stock market crash began after 2008, but it's still not settled on whether the populist right or the environmentalist left will dominate for the next few decades. Trade talks aside, Trump and Abe bonded over sumo wrestling. Trump said, "We're not ready to make a deal." And my article was about the China-US trade war, and I said it's going ballistic. For quite a while, the consensus view has been that the US and China would, after all the theatrics, reach some kind of deal. President Trump is highly tuned to the markets and, in fact, something of a 21st century artiste. His positive trade war tweets are timed around the US market hours and designed to soothe, massage, and finesse US asset prices. Trump predicts fast trade deal with China, and he turns more negative in Chinese trading hours. This is next-level gaming of a very sophisticated nature, and there are few leaders, if any, that I can recall that have appreciated the purity of the market signal and played the game at this Yehudi Menuhin virtuoso level. Of course, Carl Icahn has stayed real close. Trump's head-spinning and high-velocity tweets lulled the markets, and as Jörg Wutke pronounced, Xi got Trump wrong, and the Chinese economy is ill-prepared for what comes next. Xi misread the signals. The point being, in the trade war, Trump is no longer the decider. In the US, there is clearly a consensus baseline for a full-on toe-to-toe slugfest, as it were. In China, however, there is only one decider. That decider was pronounced as much by Xinhua in a historical announcement in March 2018. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of China proposed to remove the expression that the President and Vice President of the People's Republic of China shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms from the country's constitution. In one fell swoop, President Xi Jinping was president for life. President Xi is on a pedestal and is faced with the strongman conundrum. The political brand will not permit a retreat, let alone a surrender. Friedrich Wu, a professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, sums up the feelings of many when he describes them as a list of surrender demands for China to acquiesce to FT. If there is a decoupling between the two economies, so be it. The Chinese people can endure more pain than the spoiled and hubristic Americans. The FT said Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist president, is preparing to lead his country into an all-out trade war with the world's leading economic and technological power. But just as Chinese forces ultimately fought the US to a stalemate in Korea by pitting sheer troop numbers and a far greater tolerance for mass casualties against superior American firepower, Mr. Xi reckons he can direct a successful society-wide struggle in the trade dispute. Notwithstanding all the hyperbole and very partisan commentary, the following are the plain truths. The US exported $120 billion of goods to China last year. China shipped $540 billion of goods to the US. The disequilibrium is the essential and overarching point. Furthermore, I estimate that 80% of the tariff increase is actually going to have to be absorbed by the Chinese manufacturer and only 20% by the US consumer. If you study the basket of Chinese goods, they are commoditized and replaceable. Furthermore, it's now a racing certainty that Trump will place 25% tariffs on around $300 billion of additional Chinese imports, setting a 25% tariff on all $540 billion of Chinese imports. The US economy is in fact more of an island, autarkic economy than China's. Huawei is a proxy, and that has gone ballistic. Google suspends business activity with Huawei that requires transfer of software, hardware, technical info. Driving Huawei out of the United States and Europe is 10 times more important than a trade deal with China, according to the former White House chief strategist, Steve Bannon. He also said he would dedicate all his time to shutting Chinese companies out of the US capital markets. Essentially, my baseline is that the trade war is headed off the charts into territory the market still continues to price as a tail risk. A tail risk is the additional risk of an asset moving more than 3 standard deviations from its current price above the risk of a normal distribution. Sun Chartist tweeted, the following commodities are falling by more than 3 standard deviation: PTA, rubber, zinc, copper, coking coal in 3 standard deviations. The markets across the world shivered in May. Some caught a fever, and some on the periphery have become as delirious as victims of cerebral malaria. The markets are still pricing in a benign, but much less benign than a month ago, outcome. We need to consider what a non-benign or even maximum non-benign outcome looks like. The Chinese currency, which is minus 8.8% year on year, is surely a very visible proxy. And if this all turns ballistic, as in my baseline scenario, then this is going to fly through 7 like a hot knife through butter. And the Chinese will surely use the value of the currency as pushback. If they do, they will be pushing at an open door. It's clear that directionally money wants to leave China, and a great deal of the 2019 surge in Bitcoin is surely correlated to Chinese flight capital. Therefore, my prediction is when the currency slides, it's going to slide real quick, and dollar call options are an interesting risk-adjusted trade. I wrote last week about the China emerging and frontier markets loop phenomenon, which has been super positive for more than 2 decades and is now in a major trend change and has turned negative. I would be adding to short positions in the Australian dollar, a global trade proxy, and global trade is slowing, and the South African rand. The periphery will get smashed, as we are seeing it unfold in Lusaka. My guest at Mindspeak yesterday was the preeminent China scholar Professor Howard French, author of most recently Everything Under the Heavens: How the Past Helped Shape China's Push for Global Power. And I'll share my insights once I finish that book. This is the Chinese currency, a weekly chart from Simple Trends. He expects it to turn back up this week or next. I take you back to the Truce dinner, December 2018, and then watch this interview with Huawei's CEO, who says the US manages its own companies. The US is not the international police. They can't manage the whole world. I've written about this before. I cited the incident with the USS Decatur as being a precursor in October last year, and I called it a chicky run in July last year, where I also said the Chinese government has been quite surgical in its response and is targeting the farm economy in particular, Look at this from Sun Chartist, Bloomberg Ag. Is it time for farmland, guns and ammo, he asks. Professor French said in his presentation that China's exiting a period when it had the wind at its back and will face a hurricane head-on. He spoke of the Chinese workforce declining by 5 million people a year, and that China's reconfiguring the global economy, which is something that I wrote about in August last year when I said Xi Jinping's One Belt, One Road program binds the world to Beijing because all the roads and railways have but one destination, that is China. And I said, if you accept that mankind is at the apogee of its progress, the Anthropocene period, then at this moment of apogee, there is no other world leader thinking or operating at this kind of platform level of BRI. I wrote a piece about the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. Professor French says BRI has become a slogan. There is a whole deep mythology. There is a profound connection between China and Africa. And he said Africa provided the insights for BRI. He also said there was no official master plan to move loads of Chinese people to Africa. Spoke of the instrumentalization of history. Now moving on, Vietnam. Look at that, 40% quarter-one surge for Vietnam. They seem to be one of the big winners of the trade war. I think we'll make a deal with Iran, said President Trump. It has a chance to be a great country with the same people. We're not looking to make regime change, he said. India's ambassador to the United States announced on Thursday night, as Narendra Modi announced his second 5-year term in office, that his country would no longer import Iranian oil. He's basically tacked to Netanyahu and President Trump. As I wrote in the piece about Iran, this level of financial and coercive sanction warfare is simply unprecedented. President Trump has been a big proponent of coercive financial and sanction warfare, and its expression vis-à-vis Iran is its apogee. They once sold 2.5 million barrels of oil per day, which equated to $100 million at least. Since the beginning of May, their daily income has been zero, except for one ship that uplifted 2 million barrels.